What's the most wholesome thing a stranger has done for you? My daughters and I were living in a homeless shelter after leaving my abusive ex. The shelter rules were that we couldn't be in the building between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. So every day I'd strap the kids in the stroller the shelter had given me and we'd either walk to the library, the park, or Walmart. Each of the three was at least a mile away. One day it was raining pretty hard and I really didn't want to walk that far in the rain, so I went into a diner that was close by. I had about $100 to my name and I really didn't want to be spending it in a restaurant, but I also really didn't want to be outside in the pouring rain with my kids. I found a cheap $8 meal on the menu and ordered it and took my sweet time slowly dividing it out and feeding it to my kids while watching the window to see if the rain would let up soon. Partway through, a woman who had just finished her meal came and said she had some towels in her car and asked if I'd accept them. I said yes and she went out to her car after paying for her food. She ended up getting in her car and driving away and I just thought, okay, guess she didn't have them in her car after all. Well, she came back about 10 minutes later and handed me 2 brand new towels. I wrapped each kid up in one and thanked her. Then not long after, another stranger, a man this time, came over and without a word put a $10 bill on my table before he went to the counter to pay for his own meal and left. I don't know if either of them had figured out we were homeless or if they just could tell something was wrong. But those 2 acts of kindness meant so much to me and made such a huge difference in terms of my being able to feel like things would be okay. This brought me to tears. I hope you and your daughters are doing better now. The guy next to me on a plane once woke me up when the flight attendant came around with ice cream and got an ice cream so that I could have 2. I'll never forget that man. When I was working as a cashier, an older man pulled out $1 and asked if I wanted to see something cool. Slightly skeptical, I said sure. He folded it into a little shoe and gave it to me and it was the cutest thing. Then he told me, well, you can't just have one shoe. And folded another into a second shoe, and I still have them on my desk because I didn't have it in me to unfold them. I had just moved to a new town and had started a brand new job at a high school a few towns over. I lived 40 minutes away from my work and it was the first day of school for students. I went to start my car that morning and it wouldn't turn on, the engine had died. I had no way of getting to work and I started to panic. I wanted to make a good impression at my new school and it was my first professional job out of college. There was no way I would be able to find coverage in time and it was the first day for students and a brand new job for me, not a good look if I didn't show up. I didn't know anyone yet to call and this was before Uber was around. One of my new neighbors who was retired and also up super early walking their dog saw me outside of my car on the verge of a meltdown. They insisted on driving me to work that morning. They refused money for gas. They didn't let me feel guilty about the distance or the situation and told me they were so happy to help BC they didn't have anything else going on that day. I was able to make it to my new job on time and everything else fell into place that day. I later found out that they were actually in the middle of a big move and were in the process of moving across the country that week since they had just retired. I still get emotional thinking about that morning and the overabundance kindness shown to me that day. Not me but my sister. She got severely sunburned while on holidays in Sri Lanka. We thought she was feeling better as she spent the whole previous day in bed. We went on a trip to a waterfall in the jungle. We were friends with locals who brought us. After swimming in the water, her skin starts burning to the point where she is in tears and won't let anyone touch her. We have nothing to help her. Maybe 5 minutes later some local villagers appear with aloe vera plants and proceed to gently rub it onto her skin. Total strangers who saw the situation went to their house and brought the aloe vera. It was so kind I couldn't believe it. We ended up talking to them and they made us all dinner which we ate together from a bucket in the middle of the jungle. Unforgettable. One guy in the Santa Claus costume came to me and gave me some sweets perfectly in the moment. When I almost had a panic attack. We talked for like 15 minutes after that. This folk made my day. I think that might have been Santa himself. He helped me change a flat tire. Recommended a place for me to go to the next day to get it checked out. When I got there the next morning he had stopped by to drop off his business card and to tell them to take good care of my vehicle. When they called me to tell me that the car was ready they also told me that he had paid for the new tire. Still can't believe it. You don't get people who do that for someone they have never met before. I'm a single, childless guy in my 50s. I'll never have kids or a family. I don't know if it's cultural or biological or some alchemy of the two. But sometimes I want to take care of someone. Doing a simple good deed, stealing from Yiddish. A mitzvah, just to help someone out, make me feel good on a very fundamental level. For a moment I read this as your good deed was thieving from Yiddish people, lol. My senior year in high school I stole my lunch every day. I was essentially on my own by then due to reasons and completely broke. I thought I was getting away with it for the entire year. Towards the end of the year the dean called me into the office and explained that they knew I was stealing lunches the whole time. He then gave me a number to enter that would cover my meals. He told me not to worry about all the food, it was being covered by a faculty member. I never knew who it was exactly, but I suspect it was an elderly English teacher I had. She was always trying to sneakily give me cash and refused to let me deny. She even offered to loan me her new BMW when I made a comment about not having money for gas. I loved her. Edit, words. I was sitting alone at the cafeteria and a teacher came up to me and gave me food that she bought for me. I didn't know who she was. She has never taught me. I worked at a gas station at the time. I'd gotten myself a pretty large burn on one arm helping someone lift a grill after it had been used. And he dropped it without warning. A customer saw my arm, bought her stuff and came back 5 minutes later. She'd gotten me an aloe vera plant so I could break off pieces of it and rub on my burn. I thought that was pretty wholesome, smiley face. When I was in my early 20s I ran out of gas 2 blocks from a gas station and had no money. A man came up to my car with a jug of gas and filled my car for me. I asked him for a way to pay him back and he said, "I have a daughter your age and I know how hard it is. Merry Christmas." And he walked away. I will always remember this man. So nice. So giving. There's a spot in the building I work at that nobody wants to work in. It's the coldest area in the building because there's an opening that doesn't close and doesn't have heat, so you can't even eat food safely because the wind will blow it away. I was moved from where I usually am and wasn't prepared for how cold it would be there. I could barely handle money because my fingers felt frozen. A customer noticed how cold it was and without even asking if I was cold, he took off his gloves and gave them to me. I have no idea what his name was, but it was the most thoughtful thing a complete stranger has ever done for me. I still have the gloves too. A homeless man stole a glove out of my friend's pocket and ran. My friend threw the other glove after him yelling, "Just take it." A stranger who used to be a customer at my job took me aside once and told me she has seen my journey over the years and is so proud of me. She started crying and gave me a hug. I wish I could tell her how much that meant to me. I had something similar. I had a customer that I've known for probably 8 years now. Across 2 jobs. I worked at a convenience store, he always stopped in to get coffee. And then I switched jobs to women's clothing retail. And it turns out he picks things up for his wife and himself from there regularly. Well, I went back to school and recently got a job in my new field. But I went back to talk to my old boss. And that customer came in. We talked about what was happening in our lives. He recently retired. So he no longer goes to the convenience store for coffee. And when I talked about my stuff, he said how awesome it was and that he was so happy for me. Made me feel so good. It was so cool to have the chance to close out such a long time of seeing each other at work. It means so much to know that people are taking note of you, even when you don't really know them. Many years ago, when my brother and I were traveling to Finland on a whim and most places were booked out, a Finnish student we encountered and asked for a youth hostel spontaneously let us sleep in her dorm's living room. For a few days, she even gave up her own dorm room for us and stayed at her estranged husband's place. She showed us around, bought us some typical Finnish food and sweets, and was just incredibly nice towards 2 naive foreigners. We stayed in contact for a bit until she went abroad. And sadly I never managed to find her again. This was before Facebook and she had a very common name. But I hope she knows how much I appreciated her kindness. Wow. I am from Finland and that just makes me really happy to hear that people have positive experiences with my people. LMAO laughing face. I was in Paris and got into a huge fight with someone I cared about. We bolted in different directions. I jumped on a crowded metro headed for my hotel and wept. Many people stared, but one dear woman fished a tissue out of her purse for me. It was really simple. But it meant a lot. I was in an airport once during a particularly difficult time in my life. Sobbing my eyes out on the phone to my mom. When I first sat down it was a quiet area. But I guess a plane disembarked and a bunch of people walked by. Two separate women wordlessly handed me tissues as they walked by. It meant so much at the time. In college, flying to visit my father for spring break. The airport was 45 minutes away from campus and I didn't have a car. After my ride left, the flight was delayed until the next day, and the airline said that because I lived nearby I didn't qualify for a hotel room for the night. A lovely couple gave me their hotel room voucher, as they decided to drive through the night instead. It helped me out when I was in a really tight spot. When I was around 17 I got in my first car accident. It was snowing and very icy, and I was driving home from work. It was evening, but still fairly light because the snow reflected a decent amount of light from the street lamps. I slid on the ice and lost some control of my car. I hit the one in front of me. Not super hard, but enough to dent their back bumper and scratch my front bumper. Since it was my first accident, I sort of uncontrollably panicked and started crying even though it wasn't that bad. We pulled over and put our lights on. An older couple, probably in their 60s, got out of the car and assessed the damage. I got out, crying and profusely apologizing. The wife immediately was like, "Oh honey, is this your first car accident?" and gave me a little half hug. She asked her husband to grab her purse and got me some tissues from it to wipe away my tears. She said it was no big deal at all. Just some scratches. She understood it was a true accident and that I hadn't been driving recklessly. Even though I hit them and dented their car, they took care of me and I will never forget it. It's kind of fresh in my mind right now because my daughter is going through driver's training. Of course I hope she never gets in an accident, but if she does I hope she is lucky enough to receive the same understanding from someone. Asked if I was okay. Nearly cried. It was a tough time, but them asking that made me feel less alone and that someone cared enough to ask. I'm alright now thankfully. My 4 kids. Husband and I were traveling to see family and stopped at a Red Robin for dinner. While waiting for a table a gentleman next to us sneezed and I said bless you without thinking about it. We were shown our table shortly after and we ate our dinner. When the bill came the waitress told us our bill had been paid for by someone who appreciated the blessing I gave him and wanted to give us one back. I say bless you in reaction to anyone sneezing. Only one person ever has been offended. Most people thank me and we all go about our day. The first time I had to move for college, I went to the nearest city and took a train that would have taken me to the city in which I was going to live. The train stopped halfway and wasn't going anywhere for the rest of the day, due to a strike. So I was stuck there. Some random guy then said to me, "Hey, my sister is coming in a minute. We are going back to city I was coming from. Do you need a ride?" I accepted against better judgment. But he was really nice. Didn't even ask me to pay for gas or anything like that. Brought me back to the city and pointed me to some buses I could take. The hilarious part was calling my mom telling her I was in some stranger's car about 3 hours after getting out of her house. Yo, I would be sweating bullets if I had to call my mom about that. She'd metaphorically beat my butt over the line. I had a relationship go south and I ended up taking our 10-year anniversary trip to a foreign country alone. I met a local in one of the cities I stayed in and she hung out with me all day. Showed me the lay of the land. Bought me a couple beers. And gave me a smooch at the end of the day. She was cool. I think that's the plot to Forgetting Sarah Marshall. When I was with my first wife and my daughter was only almost a year old I had lost my job. We were getting toward the end of our savings. I went to the store to pick up a few groceries for the next few days and as I went to go pay a middle-aged woman came up and says excuse me. She said, "I do not know why but something is telling me I need to pay for your groceries." I couldn't believe it. Just about started crying and I gave her a huge hug. When I was in elementary I forgot I was getting picked up that day and hopped on the bus. I got home but didn't have a key so I sat outside. LA heat was bad. This lady slightly down the road saw me and let me go to her house for some snacks and juice and called my mom. Mom rushed in to find my dumbass admiring the lady's glass chess pieces. I don't remember her that well, happened about 10 years ago, but I'll never forget what she did. I was at a concert a while back. I'm a very short guy and I was somewhere in the middle of the crowd windmilling the F out, not really caring about not being able to see. Just enjoying the music etc. The guy standing next to me was an absolute giant of a man with hands as big as spades. Suddenly, he reaches out and takes me in his monster-sized mitts. I'm thinking the worst at this moment, maybe I've pissed him off with my relentless windmilling, but he simply lifts me into the air and plops me onto his shoulders so I can watch the rest of the set with a premium view. When the set concluded, he let me down like a toddler and simply nodded at me when I thanked him. Edit, this really blew up. I am small. About 5'8" and 10 stone or something. But this guy was seriously gargantuan. He was an absolute hero and I always remember people like this in times of need to remind myself of all the good people out there. The band was Devil Driver. Windmilling means headbanging in a circular fashion so your hair whips around like a windmill. I just have Tyrion Lannister and the mountain in my head when I imagine this. Just this week I fell asleep on my morning commute and nearly missed my stop. All of us on the early express bus are technically strangers but know each other based on our unofficial assigned seats. ECT. Well, one guy rushed to wake me up. The other asked the bus driver to wait. The bus driver himself was like, "Doesn't someone get off here?" And when I nearly forgot my coat in my race to get off, they passed it forward. It was incredibly kind and considerate. I brought Kit Kats for them the next day and thanks. Reminds you that you have a village even when you don't know it. If life was a musical, this is the part where you'd all start singing. When I was 9 a bee stung me right on my eyelid and my eye swelled shut and looked deep purple and disgusting. I was out to breakfast with my dad and some guy came up and gave me $1. Doesn't seem like much now, but back then it totally made my day. I really like this one. Particularly because of the limited details. A year or two ago I was on a long road trip. Doing about 90 on the highway. There was a guy behind me for at least 2 hours. Not tailing me but we were both going about the same speed. Out of nowhere he speeds up like crazy. Cuts me off and then slows down to the speed limit right in front of me. I had to slam the brakes and I was really pissed off. Not even a minute later we drove past a cop. After we passed the cop he speeds up to 80 to 90 again. He must have been using a GPS that alerted him to police on the road, and he was nice enough to cut me off so I wouldn't get a speeding ticket. Was really awesome. Up until high school, I didn't attend much art classes due to having to attend a different school for advanced classes. So in terms of creativity, I was far behind my peers. This became frustrating for me once I realized I much preferred art and literature over science, which my classes focused on. I ended up having to teach most of the basics to myself. I would spend most my spare time doodling and practicing my art techniques. This meant all my lunches were dedicated to it. In my junior year, towards the end of the school year, the art teachers told us there was X amount of spaces left in his exhibition for the student work and we can submit our own projects that weren't graded. I spent countless hours creating my piece for it. In the end though, I wasn't good enough for my work to make it in and I was crushed. I was so frustrated and upset that I stopped trying. Few weeks later, after not touching a sketchbook since, a senior, who I have never spoken with but sat at the end of my lunch table time to time, came up behind me on his way to a class and set a piece of paper down in front of me with a drawing on it and a little caption saying, "I like your work. Keep on drawing." He graduated a week later. So I never got to thank him properly, but it was the thing that helped me to push past my first big failure.